failure to cover one of the biggest issues when it comes to women's and girls' rights.
Because when you look up like trans issues, you get all this stuff about things like the Darlington nurses and stuff. They did lots of coverage of the cast review of the Tavistock clinic.
Although the BBC initially contacted me and did some recording, I don't think that ever went to air.
This never aired? Like, this was posted on YouTube.
But we know, and people like Helen Joyce, part of Sex Matters, the campaign for women's rights, never once interviewed on the BBC. They kept putting it no interest whatsoever.
Today, we hear from the human rights charity Sex Matters. Helen Joyce is the Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters. Welcome to Woman's Hour. It's lovely to be on.
Never once interviewed on the BBC.
Helen Joyce.
Never once interviewed on the BBC.
It's lovely to be on.
Why am I dancing with that trans person?
Let me see what this Julia Hartley-Brewer thing was. So one of the people we saw in that video we just watched from the BBC, bear in mind, Sue Evans, who's now claiming the BBC's been captured by activists pushing trans propaganda. They were biased in covering the Tavistock story. Stopped her responding. Well, they platformed her though.
The BBC and the trans activists who have basically infiltrated the BBC, who've captured the BBC, turned it into a trans propaganda organisation. I mean...
Yeah, on the face of it, what I've looked at so far, that's a ridiculous statement. I'm sorry. Maybe there's examples of where they have kind of favoured one side. I don't think overall I've really seen enough to say that this is the case.
Tell us something we don't know. I think that's something we've all been very aware of for quite some time. I mean, when isn't there a drag queen somewhere on the BBC? When isn't someone constantly representing...
Oh, because they showed RuPaul's Drag Race. Drag queens are mostly gay men, bro.
Isn't someone constantly representing women, someone who is trans, and the coverage of the Tavistock saga, of course, and of pretty much every single case involving women's rights activists taking on trans activists, trying to take away women's safety.
Yeah, the coverage of the Tavistock, we just watched something.
Women's rights. We know the way the BBC reports it, do we not? Well, let's...
And again, this person has an impetus to talk shit about the BBC, because her viewers are very anti the license fee. So they'll find any way they can to shit on the BBC. It's very obvious that this person has a bias. So bear that in mind.
Talk to the Tavistock whistleblower, the nurse, Susan Evans, who was one of those who exposed what was going on in the Tavistock, where...
Yep, via the BBC. Via the BBC. What are you talking about? We just watched it.
There had been another review of the service in 2005 by the Trust's then medical director, Dr. David Taylor. It was triggered by a nurse working at the unit, Sue Evans. She was troubled about what she was seeing.
You know, young children were going to the clinic to be basically diagnosed pretty much on a whim within a few hours as being trans, often put on a route of puberty blockers which would put them in a one-way track towards often having their genitals or their breasts removed one day, and into, frankly, a life of, absolute despair for an awful lot of these children, rendered infertile, incapable of any sexual pleasure and the like. A decision that no child should be able to make under the age of 16, I would say 18. But
How many trans children has Julia actually spoken to know this? I'm sorry, I don't think trans kids should be a thing. I don't think you should transition children. I'm not going to go around and say, oh, their lives are absolute fucking hell. I don't actually know. I don't know what their lives are like.
But Susan Evans joins us now. A very good afternoon to you, Susan.
Hello, Julia. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining us, because you are a fantastic whistleblower in terms of, like, I think the lives that you have saved from being ruined. You should sleep soundly in your bed every single night, knowing what a good thing you did, helping to expose what happened to the Tavistock.
Via the BBC Newsnight.
Now, you and I both know that the BBC, I mean, Woman's Hour, which is an absolute joke of a show for many years,
Has featured Helen Joyce quite a number of times.
Failure to cover one of the biggest issues when it comes to women's and girls' rights, but the Tavistock in particular, talking about...
What, in general?
Children's rights. The BBC's coverage of this was undoubtedly skewed by the fact that so many at the BBC have just completely signed up to sort of Stonewall mermaids agenda. Tell us when you...
What we watched was certainly not that. They had a thing with Keira Bell. They also had that Susie Green person. I need to look more into mermaids. There's something very wrong with those people. But like, the thing we watched that this person was in was very much skewed the other way. It was presenting a case that there's something wrong here. There's several of these reports from the BBC at this time. This is the same person. This wasn't biased. This wasn't biased.
You say that BBC has been infiltrated by trans activists. What you mean?
Well, I can only speak, directly to my experience. But obviously, when I first spoke up about this, there were very few clinicians who were prepared to, put their head above the parapet and express their concerns because of the environment that was around at the time. But I felt it was very important. But what I noticed was, as soon as I had submitted the papers for the judicial review, which became known as the Kira Bell Judicial Review,
Kira Bell Judicial Review. When was that? Around the same time. Oh look, a BBC article. Campaigner launches bid to ban cross-sex hormones. Kira Bell. From this year. Wow. Wow.
Although the BBC initially contacted me and did some recording,
which we've seen,
of my case, I don't think that ever went to air. And then,
when did this never aired? Like, this was posted on YouTube. You can count that as airing, surely. So is she lying here? This is the same person. She just looks older here because there's no filters on her. I'm very, very baffled by this.
BBC initially contacted me and did some recording of my case.
Because this would have been around this time, because the Kira Bell thing was heard in December 2020. This is from October 2020.
I don't think that ever went to air. And then, of course...
Yes, it did. Yes, it fucking did. It was fucking posted on YouTube. I don't know where else. Maybe it wasn't aired specifically on a BBC channel. I can't really confirm that, I guess. Like, I feel like I'm being lied to. I feel like I'm being gaslit.
Of course, that's time when...
And of course, this dipshit just nods along. Because of course she's going to hate on the BBC. All of these people want to hear how shit the BBC is because they're against the TV license. It's absolutely preposterous. It's so obvious what's happening.
Case, I don't think that ever went to air. And then, of course, as time went on, the various sort of outlets would contact me. Radio 4, I have to say, are one of the better radio
Maybe now.
programs.
BBC Radio 4, is that?
But I had other experiences where whenever I was interviewed or asked for comment, the Stonewall or the Mermaids organisation or the Tavistock would be allowed a final statement.
Yeah.
And
are we going to say, because, say, in this video, they gave the last word to this well, people still, it doesn't matter what order they put them in, people are still going to make their minds up. To me, this Tavistock thing kind of seemed like a very political, kind of canned response. So this isn't really, like, who had the last say? Does that really matter that much?
Particularly Mermaids and Stonewall made statements that were clinically not true. And they were dangerous, in my opinion, and misleading for parents and children alike. And it really infuriated me.
But was that for the BBC to say? Aren't they just going to air both sides? In this particular video, with a strong, like, favour to your side, by the way, Jesus Christ. Isn't it more for them to just show both sides and let you make your own mind up? Isn't that what the news is supposed to fucking be?
Well, yeah, I mean, indeed, and just treated again. We know that from the that internal dossier that was brought down the Director General and the head of news at the BBC, that Michael Prescott internal dossier, basically obtained by the Telegraph, disclosed that there was trans coverage was subject to.
Yep. So we saw the Telegraph video about this. I was extremely unimpressed. I'm curious as to what the review period was. We are going to look at the actual memo itself, but possibly not today. It depends on the time. But the way the Telegraph presented it, certainly in that YouTube video we watched, bear in mind that's going to be their best foot forward. I don't think they have that much of a case. And it's quite possible when I read the memo that they're actually kind of overstating a whole bunch of it. Probably because there's an impetus for the Telegraph, just like Julia Hartley-Brewer, to be as anti-BBC as possible.
The words effective censorship by specialist LGBT reporters who basically refused to cover I hate the way you use this phrase, gender critical stories, refuse to cover biological fact from the...
Which isn't true. There's lots of BBC coverage of gender critical stories. In that video, what they said as evidence of this is that they didn't cover WPATH files, which is like one leak of a bunch of files. Okay, sure, whatever. How relevant was WPATH to the UK by then anyway? And then some trans wrestler. Like, I'm sorry, man. Like, it's just not great, is it? It's not good evidence.
You know, and from the view of you know, particularly women's activists. But we know, and people like Helen Joyce, a regular on the show, key part of...
It was literally been on Women's Hour that you were bitching about earlier.
Sex Matters, the campaign for women's rights on this issue, author of a brilliant book, Trans, never once interviewed on the BBC, and kept putting it no interest whatsoever.
It's appeared on Women's Hour, know that much for a fact. In fact, I would say she has been interviewed. Supreme Court win, Helen Joyce on BBC Stoke. Like, she's called into a bunch of stuff. You could maybe say that she hasn't been interviewed formally by these people, and maybe that's why they're getting away with this.
No, it's actually the law since mid-April. The Supreme
Helen Joyce.
Court judgment became the clarified law at the second they handed it down. There's nothing to wait for further than that. Of course, there may be legal challenges to that.
Also been on Women's Hour.
People in spaces. So you can support everybody, but you don't do that by pretending that some men are women.
Helen Joyce speaks to Nawala McGovern on BBC Radio 4 Women's Hour about the Supreme Court ruling.
Of course, some men are subjected to domestic violence, both men who identify as trans and men who...
Let me just see, was this a call-in or was it like a more formal interview? Because I think maybe the way they're using language, they can technically say she wasn't interviewed, but she's certainly featured on there. She's been platformed repeatedly. BBC Stoke as well. BBC 5 Live Breakfast.
Today, we hear from the human rights charity Sex Matters, who supported the Group for Women Scotland in challenging the Scottish Government at the Supreme Court. Sex Matters were one of only 4 organisations allowed to intervene in the appeal. Helen Joyce is the Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters and also author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality. Welcome to Women's Hour. It's lovely to be on. Well, a month on from the ruling...
Welcome to Women's Hour, Helen Joyce. But wait, hang on.
You know, and from the view of you know, particularly women's activists. But we know, and people like Helen Joyce, a regular on the show, key part of Sex Matters, the campaign for women's rights on this issue, author of a brilliant book, Trans, never once interviewed on the BBC, and kept putting it no interest whatsoever.
Come on, man, come on. And the thing is, they know that the kinds of people that watch this show are not gonna question this. All you have to do is Google it. All you have to do is Google BBC Helen Joyce. She's been on there like a lot. She was on there in 2024 about the cast review. BBC Radio London. RSHE guidance. There's plenty of these appearances. I'm sorry, this is preposterous.
And it was, you know, an absolutely, you know, groundbreaking book exposing what was really going on, and just no interest whatsoever. Whereas you think about some of the nonsense that gets covered.
I'm like fucking shocked at this. It's just lie after lie. This person, I don't think, is being particularly truthful. They don't think that video, assuming they're talking about this, was aired when it was. Helen Joyce has never featured on BBC when she has. What's next?
On BBC, but this is the thing. I was told what's happened at the BBC is that, you know, they go to desks. It's not like there's lots of different reporters do lots of different things. It's like with the climate coverage or other coverage of other things. It's a specific desk of people, and they cover this particular issue, and then of course more and more activists move into this particular desk, and it just becomes everybody feeding on themselves.
We talk about this particular desk, but there's so many different ways of like the BBC platforming you. Even if it's not through this specific desk, which I guess I'm going to learn more about. Like I said, I still need to look at this this internal memo.
And basically not allowing, they become the gatekeepers and not allowing any story that doesn't agree with their worldview to get through.
The UK teach gender years before sex ed. It's possible it does, but from what I understand, the RSHE guidance that they're bringing in for the next school year, they want to get rid of a lot of that. They don't want to be teaching things like everyone has a gender identity and stuff.
Yeah, and that's right. And I have to say, there are some really good staff in the BBC who I think found themselves caught up in this, that they tried to allow, for example, there was one particular Radio 2 show, and I asked specifically to have an opportunity to respond to the claims that I knew mermaids were about to make. And although that particular person really tried to help me, ultimately
You're not owed this, I'm sorry.
Were overruled. And I think I've heard from other staff who have subsequently left the BBC, and we know about Jenny Murray, of course, on Wednesday, that they were just not allowed to give an alternative view. And I think that's the really important thing to say, Julia. It's not an anti-trans view, but in medicine and the area where I work clinically, it's really important that we have an open mind and we try to ascertain what is the best care for these children, not what is ideologically expounded on by these various organisations.
No, and that's the thing, and they were also treated as if they were experts in it. And again, it was fascinating when the CAST review came out, which was the big review into treating of so-called trans children. There's no such thing as a trans child, of course, but the treatment of children.
I disagree. There is such thing as a trans child. This is a really stupid argument that I wish people would move away from. It doesn't matter whether or not there's such thing as a trans child. What matters is, ought children transition? My opinion, no, they shouldn't. That's what matters. Like, well done that you've recited the fucking thing on Billboard, Steve's fucking billboard. Like, wow. But it's not really true. If all trans is just kind of living as the opposite sex in as much as you can, or even just calling yourself trans and that's the be-all and end-all, then yes, there's such thing as a trans child.
At the Tavistock Clinic and elsewhere in Britain, and lots of people who being really sort of say, oh, you're all terrible and transphobic.
What is happening?
People who being really sort of say, oh, you're all terrible and transphobic.
Okay, it's just like this.
There was barely anything.
Yeah, their internet provider is smelling bullshit.
To anyone who'd been paying attention in the CAST review, which was a brilliant report, and she put it together superbly, and she had the credentials as a senior paediatrician. But actually, an awful lot of this stuff was already known. But there were claims being made by Stonewall and trans activists like mermaids that if children who aren't given affirmative care or given puberty blockers are more likely to commit suicide. Not true. I mean, absolutely not true. And that puberty blockers are reversible. Actually, virtually any child put on them ends up not. That the damage to children reversible. Actually, virtually any child put on them ends up not. That the damage.
Okay, I think I do know what she's referring to here. The suicide thing, it might actually be true. It's just not really borne out much in evidence. It might just be very scant.
To children's brain development, their bones, and all the other physical damage of not going through puberty properly, that was completely, covered up. That there was no proper long-term research to follow.
You cap as much as they do. They cap your internet speed. Maybe that's why Katie Montgomery stopped streaming.
These dangerous drugs being given to children. There were so many things that were just talked about as if they were fact, and they were just simply not medically proven.
Yeah, the problem is this person states their opinion as facts all the time too.
Yeah, and really that's why I sort of put my head above the parapet again. I mean, I'm getting into my clinical work in the main now. But again, when I heard people at the BBC claiming that this was a right-wing plot, and that the BBC...
Yeah, there's going to be people with different opinions at the BBC for sure. There's probably a wide range of different people.
Was being undermined. I've always supported the idea that we have an independent press, and I've, for many years enjoyed the BBC, but I experienced it directly. They wouldn't give me an opportunity to even have the conversation. And this is not about necessarily...
Which conversation? Are we still talking about when they didn't get the last word against Mermaid? I just don't see why this person is owed that. I'm sorry.
They're saying, I know absolutely.
I think this person is approaching from the state of mind that, well, I'm right, and so they should give me the last word. They don't owe you that.
Everything and you don't. Yep. But it was just that I clearly witnessed that my opinion and our opinions within the sort of what's known as the gender critical world, I don't like the term, but just people who are open-minded about this and want to get to some kind of evidence base around it are just silenced.
Yeah,
and
let's just have
silenced.
For me, I felt it was very definitely a step in the right direction for a more holistic and cautious approach to what, let's face it, for children is going to be life-changing decision-making. You know, that when children move from the young service into the adult service, you know, if they are to commence hormone treatments and have surgeries, those are going to have an absolutely irreversible effect on their life. And so, you know, I'm sorry to hear that Hannah sort of hears Dr. Cass's recommendations in that way, because what I would say that the report is trying to bring in is to make this a much more inclusive and wider view of the person, of the individual.
Yes, he was silenced. This is a person who is being silenced by the BBC, specifically.
It was triggered by a nurse working at the unit, Sue Evans. She was troubled about what she was seeing.
My experience of working with most of the young people was that once you assessed them and found out more about them, they had complex backgrounds. It wasn't just the gender dysphoria.
Silenced.
Conversation. Well, again, we reported on the Sunday Times that presenters, you know, actually female presenters in particular, complaining at the BBC and reporters complaining over trans reporting. And we saw, didn't we, with Martine Croxall, the BBC newsreader, correcting pregnant people to pregnant women with an eye roll, yes. And being formally disciplined over that.
Yeah, wasn't that like impartiality? I mean, I understand the sentiment. Like, that might have been an impartiality thing. You know, you're showing an opinion on a term. At the same time, I don't like the kind of gender neutral language kind of stuff. But it's been something that's been forced on the culture. It's been something that in some ways has like infiltrated into culture, and is kind of now starting to be pushed back on. But there isn't really evidence of anything. What are we watching? We're watching Julia Hartley-Brewer lie about the BBC.
We saw a presenter on Justin Webb on the Radio 4 Today programme, the flagship Radio 4 news programme, being formally disciplined for pointing out trans women, so, you know, a biological male. I mean, that's a matter of fact. And one of the issues has been over the conversations about trans is that by using terms like
Justin Webb, trans women, in other words, males. Yeah, it's another thing. It's like considered offensive. I'm not bothered by this. I can see why they wouldn't want them saying this kind of thing. I think this kind of thing probably should change. Why are we hating on a whistleblower for showing the hypocrisy? Well, I'm hating on people that are lying. This person is lying. This person has also been lying. What I'm pointing out is that these people are lying. I don't like people that lie. Lying isn't good. I don't think the BBC is anywhere near as bad as these people are pretending it is. And Julia Hartley-Brewer has like an ideological impetus to hate on the BBC because her audience are against things like the license fee and would only be for the license fee if the BBC parroted their views, which it's not going to do.
Trans women or trans man. Actually, it's confused a lot of people, and it's much better to talk about it, you know.
Yeah, I don't personally see, like, trans women are male. I don't really see there being a problem here. I can see why the BBC, to try and uphold some kind of impartiality and to try not to offend, there probably is a culture of not wanting to offend one side or the other. And I'm sure, I'm imagining this right here was probably off script, probably wasn't what he was asked to say. It's all a bit silly. I think the culture probably should change. Because she criticised the BBC, she's lying about the whistleblowing. What are you talking about? I'm not saying that what Sue Evans was saying in this video was all lies and was therefore bullshit. I showed this video in full on my channel. I platformed it. I platformed all the claims she made. Probably what she's saying is true. I'm sure it probably is. But then she's going on Julia Hartley-Brewer, a person intrinsically biased against the BBC, pretty much getting paid to talk whatever shit she can about the BBC right now. She's going on saying the BBC silenced her and didn't air a section where she talked about this subject. They did air this. This is it right here. October 2020. She's talking about this period because she talked about the Kira Bell case, which was heard in 2020, December, which she was involved in. So she's lying. There are lies being spread right now about the BBC and this kind of pro-trans bias when they were platforming people like this in videos like this back in 2020. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that any of what she said in this video was lies.
Trans-identified man, biological male would be a more honest way of putting it. But we...
It probably would, yeah. in some ways, it kind of seems like they're going to get complained about now, whatever terminology they use. So, I mean, like I said, I don't really agree with this particular complaint, but it's not really a big deal, I don't think.
See this across the board in the media. It's not just a problem at the BBC, is it?
No, I mean, I have to say there are certain papers, I don't know if I'm allowed to name check them, but I think the Times and the Telegraph, and even at times the Daily Mail, have actually printed articles.
Oh, all the ones that she and her audience agree with. Wow.
Which allowed people to express their concerns, and I've certainly had a good experience in certain areas. But in other papers, when I read the reporting, and we know that Suzanne Moore left The Guardian because she just felt
I did hear about The Guardian. It was in a Kidology video, of all things. Seems to be most likely true, but what's it got to do with the BBC?
Wasn't allowed to question anything, and I think that's the terrible thing. And what I'm hoping that out of this, I don't want to see the BBC close.
No, I don't either.
But what
I don't believe you, Julia. Don't believe you.
I want to emerge from this is an environment where people a lot more feel able to hold on to what they believe is a sort of reality-based view, and I
agree with this.
Even be allowed to question things and say, but what if this?
If you're not...
I agree with all of this, but she wasn't owed to be platformed by that Radio 2 show. And she was platformed anyway by the BBC.
Doing that in a medical establishment, and if you're not doing that as a journalist, I think you're in the wrong job.
I'd agree, there probably are problems at the BBC. It does also seem like they're kind of correcting some of that. Because when you look up, like, trans issues, you get all this stuff about things like the Darlington nurses and stuff. They did lots of coverage of the cast review of the Tavistock clinic. Like, it's just all, it's crazy. It's crazy to me. Like, there are some issues, so let's paint it as if there's, like, some ideological capture. Like, the whole thing is, like, rotten to the core. It's crazy. It's just not true.
That has always been my deepest concern, that, you know, we don't know about this medication and the full effects of it, but we weren't allowed to even question it.
Absolutely.
You get accused of being a transphobe and a bigot, and that is a terrible thing in medicine and clinical work. It's a travesty.
Absolutely. Well, Suzanne Evans, you've been, and honestly, the number of children you've protected, you should really...
Didn't even get a name right, called her Suzanne. Amazing journalism, as per usual. Well done, Julia.
Really be given a medal. Tavistock whistleblower Suzanne Evans, thank you very much. A former nurse at the Tavistock, thank you for that. Sam Armstrong, I mean, look, you're a big player of the Free Speech Union, and they've been, you know, helping a lot of these cases. And she mentioned the Kira Bell case, you know, a child who was allowed to sort of, you know, be given treatment.
Yes, Kira Bell, someone else who's been platformed by the fucking BBC extensively. Give me a fucking break, man.
And she said, I wasn't qualified. You should never have allowed me to agree to this stuff. And they're doing it without parents knowing often, or bullying parents by saying, well, would you want a trans kid or do you want a dead kid? I mean, what happened at the Tavistock was outrageous, but the BBC is part of the problem.
Yeah, and they've set up these kind of special little units and hubs to deal with conversation where they think that they, the BBC, need to determine what is and isn't acceptable to say. And you see it on the climate issue in particular, where the...
Oh, God, don't even fucking start on that. Shit, man, Jesus Christ.
BBC have a very specialist team there, allegedly specialist, that determine...
They just got blue hair and nose rings.
Determine what is and isn't acceptable to express on the climate.
Is he, like, actually, like, drunk? Did he just, like, literally wake up in his chair and they made him do this segment? Like, what the fuck is going on? At the start of it, he's, like, all slumped down. Jesus Christ.
Blue hair and nose rings.
Determine what is and isn't acceptable to
Determine what is and isn't acceptable. He's going to fucking keel over any second.
On the climate issue, and the problem you get with that is when you have a fake consensus, that's when things that everyone has worked out are madness just
fake consensus. I just don't think the BBC has like a consensus. Maybe there's specific like desks or whatever where there are issues with this, but the BBC is a wide, like, it's a big organization with a lot of different branches.
Carry on and perpetuate for that long. So never you mind that China, Russia, Brazil, the United States have now abandoned the green madness. We're going to carry it on. We're going to bankrupt ourselves. And
China, Russia, Brazil, the United States. Yeah, countries that we really want to aspire to be like.
And the green madness, just carry on and perpetuate for that long. So never you mind that China, Russia, Brazil, the United States have now abandoned the green madness.
I don't want to be like those countries. I don't want to be like any of those fucking countries. Jesus Christ, man.
We're going to carry it on. We're going to bankrupt ourselves. And in 20 years' time, we're going to look back and think, oh, what? Why did we do that?
Some of us have been speaking up on this. Well, I tell you what's interesting.
They just pull this shit out of their ass, man. It's like fucking preposterous. This Sam Armstrong guy is so stupid. I think Helen Joyce has been talking about the BBC as well. I'm like really shocked by this, to be honest. I think there's some kind of massive like plot to make this out to be so much worse than it is. Maybe there's been some evidence of bias in certain fields. To make out what some of these people are making out is nuts. I'm sorry. It just doesn't fucking work. It doesn't make sense. It's so obvious that there's like an ideological bent to all of this. BBC's dangerous lies. Biased and boring purveyor of propaganda. Wow. Another one pushing to get rid of the license fee. Are you sure you haven't like fallen into a bit of an ideological hole yourself, Helen? Are you sure that's not what's going on here? Big cultural and sporting events are free to air. Lack a non-partisan voice. Sensitivity to elite opinion, wow. Yeah, they refer to some trans people using their pronouns. It's fair enough if you have a problem with that, especially when it comes to like crime, especially when it comes to like sexual assault, things like that. Suddenly these women are like doing all these sexual assaults, only they're actually male. That's fair enough to have a problem with. Again, isn't that more of a general culture thing, you know? BBC style guide. Yeah, so people are allowed to like word it how they want. So it's not really, it's more the bias from the individual journalists. University Challenge, Antiques Roadshow, Escape to the Country, Repair Shop, Match of the Day have featured trans people. Censors women without any mention. Again, it's one thing to have a problem with this kind of stuff. The Vivienne, isn't the Vivienne just a gay man? Or wasn't? She's dead now. Pretty sure, was the Vivienne trans? Yeah, this was a gay man. Fuck off, man. So we're talking about like pro-trans bias. And then we have a picture of the Vivienne, who was a gay man who used they, them pronouns. Okay. These people are celebrities. Yeah, BBC is going to show some like fucking bullshit fucking celebrity shit. Single article. Well, they covered it. I don't know. What do you want? How many articles do they need to do about any one person like Stephen Ireland? I read update on the cause of death. People cared about this. RuPaul's Drag Race is a big deal. So when like someone wins it and then dies years later, people care about it. It is kind of hot news, if not to someone like you. Pricey purchase of RuPaul's Drag Race. Yeah, it's a big deal. I'm like up and down on it. I used to like it more than I do now. But it's a big deal. I mean, I don't know. Like, Drag Race was like really annoying and like politicized for a good few years. It does feel like, because I've seen like more recent, like super recently, it actually seems to have calmed down on that. It's actually a lot less unbearable a lot of the time. Okay, just no one really has much of anything. What we're doing is making out that the BBC is like incredibly like biased, and almost all of the evidence that is presented is just pretty weak. I'm sorry. Like, there are cultural issues at the moment that are going to take a long time to straighten out. The BBC is going to be like downwind of that. And in the meantime, we all just sow as much distrust as we possibly can, using every tiny thing we can find. Even if our examples are some trans woman in fucking pro wrestling and whatever the other fucking thing was. The WPATH files. Oh, okay, wow. They didn't cover the WPATH files. Okay, sure. Whatever, bro. This is like preposterous. I'm sorry. I need to read the actual memo to see if maybe a lot of these people are just using it to make like far more of a point than what the actual point is supposed to be. That is, of course, very possible. And that these are just propagandists, like pushing it as much as humanly possible. But at the same time, I just don't think there's very much to this. Certainly the trans angle, there's like BBC institutional bias. I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that much of a big deal.